You may have noticed over the time here, I don't spend a lot of time crafting sermons that repeat phrases and refrains and come back to a story just to tie it up so that you can pay attention to the end. I've almost stopped worrying about you paying attention. You know, there's so much about what we do as pastors that resembles doing a little tightrope walk, and little party tricks, you know, and again, just to keep your attention so that you can stay awake for just a little bit. Even though I think Jesus was probably pretty good at it with all of his stories, but I notice as soon as he stops telling his stories, they tend to fall asleep. In the garden, you know, everywhere he goes, up on the mountaintop, here's Moses, and they're sleeping away. And I don't even have Moses here, so I've got a lot of competition. Boy, one of the best things that I've ever done was during my sabbatical back in 2010, or was it 11? Went to a continuing education thing that lasted for 4 days. And what's astounding about it was I was excited to go, number one, but even more astounding, number two, once I was there, there was not a second that I wanted to leave. You know, it's like you go to continuing education things, you take the last seat way at the back, just in case you need to take a break for a day or two. Or just slip out when you can't have your attention, you're falling asleep. But not this time. It was to Rachel Naomi Remen, who's a Jewish mystic, and started out as a medical doctor in California, was the head of the Stanford Medical Center in various capacities with cancer treatments and surgeries and whatnot. And she did that for 20-some years and was brilliant at it, was at the top of her game when she quit, just quit, and went back to school to become a therapist, of all things. The pay was so much better, but it made her life. It was not any better, but it doesn't matter. And she just died yesterday. And I'm not going to weave a magic party trick for you today. Although I could. I've got so many stories about being in storms that I've gotten out of by the skin of my teeth, and so do you. But we tend to not remember them until we remember them. And that's what Rachel Naomi Remen did. Started to learn and understand that true healing in people's lives of all sorts is when they can be listened to. When we listen to each other and really get out of the way and just hear what people have on their minds and on their hearts mostly, then healing can take place. Yeah, people still die from ovarian cancer and whatnot, but a healing truly takes place. And it was really amazing. When I walked in there and sat down with mostly doctors and nurses, and the doctor sat on one side and the nurses sat on the other side, and there's a pecking order, and for the most part, there are two different groups. And the first thing she did was say, all right, count off, 1, 2, 3, 4, and then she mixed them all up. And took the name tags and got rid of whether they were a doctor or a nurse and made everybody equal. Everybody was equal. And it was profound. And then she went on to say just a few words and then put us in dyads, just two people facing each other, which would be most people's horror, a stranger sitting in front of them. And she just said, we're going to take turns. One person is going to tell a story about, in this case, their shirt. What they're wearing, what their shirt is, and the other's going to listen. And there's no shaking your head Or I have one just like that. Oh my gosh, my grandma gave me one, or my husband gave me that. I traded it in because that one is much nicer. And get rid of all of the references you have in your mind for how you fit into their story, but let them go. And we're going to do this for 10 minutes. 10 minutes about your shirt. And we did, because she had 4 days. And so we got into these dyads. And when somebody stopped talking about their shirt, where they got it from, what it means to them, why they picked it out. And my first thought was, it's just a shirt. But it's amazing what comes out when you really start to dig down on why are you wearing this one as opposed to those. And all you could do was say, tell me more. What a therapist thing. My wife is a therapist. Tell me more about that. Interesting. And it went on, and she couldn't stop us. We just kept going. And then it moved into serious stuff, that really did a lot of healing. And the healing came from being listened to and not worrying about being interrupted. How many times do you come across somebody that's suffering? And you say, oh my gosh, that happened to me. If I told you, it turned out okay. I'm here. Yeah, I went to jail too. Oh my gosh, you were in jail? And then it becomes about your jail sentence, not about theirs and their impending trial, which is very real and true. So Rachel Naomi Remen, very dear to many people's hearts. And I'd like to read a section from Rachel Naomi's book, her only book that she wrote in the beginning, and then she wrote a sequel to it, just telling her stories about the patients that she had. And this is just one. And talk about storms that we endure and go through. We all go through storms. But when we make it through the storms, it's like we forget it. We remember the storms, not the clear weather. I've driven across this country so many times on motorcycle. I only tell you the story of those trips that went sideways, where you wake up in 8 inches of snow, or you slide off the road, or somebody gets hit in front of you and you go down too. Those are the ones you remember, but there are so many non-eventful, boring stories of sitting, vibrating your back to death on a motorcycle. I don't need to do it anymore. But I would put you to sleep. So we only remember the storms. And I'll finish up in the end here with just a couple notes about, maybe I won't tie it up with a bow. Therefore, go and do this. Or the good news is, in case you missed it, all right, here it is. I'm going to read it verbatim right out of here. So just sit back, and it's got some hard stuff in it, but I know all of you have had hard stuff. So, and I won't tell you this one because, boy, this will put everything in perspective for us. Can you hear me on Zoom again? Thumbs up? All right, here we go. All right, so this one's entitled Remembering. This is in honor of this amazing woman. What we do to survive is often different from what we may need to do in order to live. My work as a cancer therapist often means helping people to recognize this difference, to get off the treadmill of survival and to refocus their lives. Of the many people who have confronted this issue, one of the most dramatic was an Asian woman of remarkable beauty and style. Through our work together, I realized that some things which can never be fixed can still be healed. She was about to begin a year of chemotherapy for ovarian cancer, but this is not what she talked about in our first meeting. She began our work together by telling me she was a bad person. Hard, uncaring, selfish, and unloving. She delivered this self-indictment with enormous poise and certainty. I watched the light play across her perfect skin and the polish of her long black hair and thought privately that I did not believe her. The people I had known who were truly selfish were rarely aware of it. They simply put themselves first without doubt or hesitation. In a voice filled with shame, Anna began to tell me that she had no heart, and that her phenomenal success in business was a direct result of this ruthlessness. Most important, she felt that it was not possible for her to become well, as she had earned her cancer through her behavior. She questioned why she had come seeking help. There was a silence in which we took each other's measure. Why not start from the beginning, I said. It took her more than 8 months to tell her story. She had not been born here. She had come to this country at 10 years old as an orphan. She had been adopted by a good family, a family that knew little about her past. With their support, she had built a life for herself. In a voice I could barely hear, she began to speak of her experiences as a child in Vietnam during the war. She began with the death of her parents. She had been 4 years old the morning the Kong had come, small enough to hide in the wooden box that held the rice in the kitchen. The soldiers had not looked there after they had killed the others. When at last they had gone and she ventured from hiding, she had seen that her family had all been beheaded. That was the beginning. I was horrified. She continued on. It has been a time of brutality, a world without mystery. She was alone. She had starved. She had been brutalized, hesitantly at first, and then with growing openness, she told story after story. She had become one of a pack of homeless children. She had stolen, she had betrayed, she had hated, she had helped kill. She had seen things beyond human endurance, done things beyond imagination. Like a spore, she had become what was needed to survive. As the weeks went by, there was little I could say. Over and over, she would tell me that she was a bad person, a person of darkness. I was filled with horror and pity, wishing to ease her anguish, to offer comfort, yet she had done these things. I simply continued to listen. Over and over, a wall of silence and despair threatened to close us off from each other. Over and over, I would beat it back, insisting that she tell me the worst. She would weep and say, "I do not know if I can." And hoping that I would be able to hear it, I would tell her that she must. And she would begin another story. I often found myself not knowing how to respond, unable to do anything but stand with her there, one foot in this peaceful, calm office on the water, the other in a world beyond imagination. I had never been orphaned, never been hunted, never missed a meal except by choice, never violently attacked another person, but I could recognize the whisper of my darkness in hers. And I stood in that place in myself to listen to her, to try to understand. I wanted to jump in. I wanted to soothe. I wanted to make sense, yet none of this was possible. Once in despair myself, I remember thinking, I am her first witness. Over and over she would cry out, I have such darkness in me. At such times it seemed to me that the cancer was actually helping her make sense of her life, offering the relief of a feared but long-awaited punishment. At the close of one of her stories, I was overwhelmed by the fact that she had actually managed to live with such memories. I told her this and added, I am in awe. We sat looking at each other. It helped me that you say that. I feel less alone. I nodded and we sat in silence. I was in awe of this woman and her ability to survive. In all the years of working with people with cancer, I had never met anyone like her. I ached for her, like an animal in a trap that gnaws off its own leg. She had survived, but only at a terrible cost. Gradually, she began to shorten the time frame of her stories, to talk of more recent events. her ruthless business practices, how she used others, always serving her own self-interest. She began to talk about her contempt, her anger, her unkindness, her distrust of people, and her competitiveness. It seemed to me that she was completely alone. Nothing has really changed, I thought. Her whole life was still organized around her survival. Once, at the close of a particularly painful session, I found myself reviewing my own day, noticing how much of the time I was focused on surviving and not living. I wondered if I too had become caught in survival. How much had I put off living today in order to do or say what was expedient, to get what I thought I needed? Could survival become a habit? Was it possible to live so defensively that you never got to live at all? You have survived, Anna, I blurted out. Surely you can stop now. She looked at me puzzled, but I had nothing further to say. One day she walked in and said, I have no more stories to tell. I said, is it a relief? To my surprise, she answered, no, it feels empty. Tell me. She looked away. I'm afraid I will not know how to survive now. But I could never forget, she said. Then she laughed. A few weeks after this, she brought in a dream, one of the first she had remembered. In the dream, she had been looking in a mirror, seeing herself reflected there to the waist. It seemed to her that she could see through her clothes, through her skin, through to the very depths of her being. She saw that she was filled with darkness and felt a very familiar shame. As intense as that she had felt on the first day that she'd come into my office. Yet she could not look away. Then it seemed to her as if she were moving, as if she had passed through it into the mirror, into her own image, and was moving deeper and deeper into her darkness. She went forward blindly for a long time. Then, just as she was certain that there was no end, no bottom, that surely this would go on, she seemed to see a tiny spot far ahead of her in the dream. As she moved closer to it, she was able to recognize what it was. It was a rose, a single perfect rosebud on a long stem. For the first time in 8 months, she began to cry softly without pain. It's very beautiful, she told me. I can see it very clearly, the stem with its leaves and its thorns. It is just beginning to open, and its color is indescribable, the softest, most tender, most exquisite shade of pink. I asked her what this dream meant to her, and she began to sob. It's mine, she said. It's inside here still. All this time it is still there. It has waited for me to come back for it. The rose is one of the oldest archetypal symbols for the heart that appears in both the Christian and the Hindu traditions and in many fairy tales. It presented itself now to Anna, even though she had never read these fairy tales or heard of these traditions. For most of her life, she had held her darkness close to her, had used it as her protection, had even defined herself through it. Now, finally, she had been able to remember. There was a part she had hidden even from herself, a part she had kept safe, a part that had not been touched. Even more than our experiences, our beliefs become our prisons, but we carry our healing with us even into the darkest of our inner places. A Course in Miracles says, when I have forgiven myself and remembered who I am, I will bless everyone and everything I see. The way to freedom often lies through the open heart. Rachel Naomi Remen walked on water. She walked on water. And she did it by hardly saying a word. She'd come in and sit in her chair with severe cancer already in her body. and sat in this little chair, said a couple things, and said, now, get into dyads. Oh, wait a minute. Let's renumber ourselves. We're going to mix you up again. It says, and you can do this healing for people anywhere you go. Just listen. How are you? And then listen. And when they just give you this pat answer, say, tell me more. And before you know it, they're living, not surviving. Peter, Peter, Peter. Jesus, just like you, I want to do that. I remember the time I walked with Jesus on the water. I remember the time I said a story. It was just like Rachel Naomi Remen. Shut up. Peter, sit down and row. Just sit down and row. Don't worry, another storm's coming. It always does. We'll get another chance to try again. And if you're suffering, listen. Just listen. Listen. And then go tell somebody your story. And if they're not listening, move on. Move on. That's it. That is the good news. The good news is, hey, we're going to suffer again. That's the good news. We get to suffer again and practice one more time to heal our lives. Isn't that great? Tongue in cheek. It's not so great. Not so great. And I see you. Whew, that's the thing about this job, is I get to see you. Every single one of you suffering through storms. Every single one of you. Me too. Let me tell you about a time that I gotta shut up. Amen. Amen.